The garden was glowing with lights, strings of bulbs hanging across the trees, casting a golden shine on the small gathering. It was supposed to be a perfect evening, quiet and full of love. The bride stood tall in her white dress, holding the groom's hands, and for a moment, the world around them felt still. But hidden behind the bushes on the edge of the street, another pair of eyes were watching, filled not with joy but anger. The neighbor across the fence, an older woman with a face always wrinkled in disapproval, was clutching her phone tightly. She had been waiting for something like this. She could not stand the sight of so many people gathered, smiling and celebrating. She told herself it was because of the noise, but deep down it was not noise that bothered her. It was the faces. The couple was different, and she hated the difference. Her heart beat fast with rage, and her fingers trembled as she pressed the numbers on her phone. With a voice sharp and full of false concern, she told the operator that something suspicious was happening. She said the word illegal more than once. She knew exactly which words would bring the police quickly. Inside the garden, the couple had no idea that a storm was being prepared against them. The bride's eyes glistened as she listened to the vows. The groom's voice was steady, promising to stand by her no matter the struggle. Their families, dressed in shades of blue and gray, watched with warm smiles. Some wiped tears, others held hands, while children sat quietly in the back rows. Nobody sensed that trouble was already on its way. The first clue came with the sound of footsteps beyond the gates. One of the guests, turning his head, caught the sight of flashing lights at the end of the street. The faint wail of a siren echoed, cutting through the music and laughter. A nervous silence spread among the guests. The bride looked at her groom with confusion, and he squeezed her hands, trying to reassure her, though he himself felt the chill run down his spine. The gates opened, and in walked 3 uniformed officers. Their faces were stiff, trained to show no emotion, yet their eyes scanned the garden with suspicion. The music stopped. The children fell silent. Every eye turned toward the officers as they stepped closer, their boots pressing against the grass. The neighbor, standing at the edge of her porch, crossed her arms with satisfaction. She thought she had won. The lead officer spoke in a voice meant to control the scene. "We had a report of disturbance here. Can the organizers step forward?" His words felt heavy in the air, almost choking the joy that had been built so carefully. The groom stepped forward, keeping his hands visible, calm but strong. His bride followed half a step behind, her grip still holding onto him. Their eyes did not waver, even when the officers stopped right in front of them. For a moment, time slowed. Everyone in the garden held their breath. The groom's father stood up, ready to speak if needed, but the groom raised his hand slightly, signaling he would handle it. He looked straight at the officers, and with a steady voice, he explained, "This is our wedding. We are not disturbing anyone. We are celebrating with family and friends." The officers exchanged quick glances. The neighbor shouted from the side, her voice cutting across the night, "They don't belong here. You need to check them. This whole thing is against the law." Her words were sharp, dripping with bitterness. Some guests gasped. Others turned their heads toward her in disbelief. The bride's face tightened, but she held her calm, refusing to give the neighbor the satisfaction of her anger. The lead officer looked back at the couple. His eyes softened, only slightly, but enough for the guests to notice. He asked for identification. The groom nodded, pulling out his wallet slowly, careful with every move. The bride too handed over her card. The officer studied them in the glow of the garden lights. Behind him, the other officers shifted uneasily, as if they already felt the tension between what they were told and what they were seeing with their own eyes. The neighbor waited eagerly, expecting the officers to drag the couple away, to ruin their evening completely. But instead, something strange happened. As the lead officer looked at the groom's card, his expression changed. His eyes widened for a second, and then he blinked, almost as if trying to hide his surprise. He looked again at the bride's card, and this time he hesitated before speaking. The guests leaned forward in silence. The neighbor frowned, trying to see what was happening. The groom stood tall, his hand holding the bride's tightly, his chin lifted as if daring the world to challenge him. The bride, her voice quiet but firm, whispered to him, "Whatever happens, we stand together." The officer cleared his throat, his voice not as strong as before. "We need to confirm something." His words left the guests restless, and the bride's heart raced faster. Something about the way he looked at them was different now. It was not just suspicion anymore, it was recognition. And in that moment, though no one yet understood, everything was about to change. The garden was still silent as the officer held both ID cards in his hand. The guests could feel the weight of that pause, like a heavy stone sitting on their chests. The bride's fingers squeezed the groom's hand tighter, her knuckles turning white. The neighbor smirked from across the fence, certain the moment she had been waiting for was about to happen. She imagined the couple being dragged out, their special night ruined in front of everyone. But instead, the officer asked in a softer tone than before, "Can we step aside and talk privately?" His words were not harsh, not like the demand everyone expected. The groom agreed calmly, and together with his bride, they walked a few steps away, followed by the three officers. The guests whispered nervously, their eyes darting between the neighbor and the couple, unsure if the celebration was about to end in disaster. The neighbor could not stop herself. She shouted, "Don't let them fool you. People like that always hide things. They don't belong here." Her voice carried sharp hate, and for a second, the bride almost turned to respond, but the groom squeezed her hand again, shaking his head gently. His silence was stronger than any words. The officer opened the groom's card again and looked closer. His eyes shifted, his jaw tightened, and then he raised his head to meet the groom's gaze. "Sir, are you aware that your name is registered with the department?" The question was strange, loaded, and the bride frowned with confusion. The groom nodded slowly. "Yes, I'm aware." The officers blinked at him, unsure what to say next. The lead one finally sighed and spoke. "You should have mentioned that earlier. It changes everything." The bride tilted her head, her voice steady but curious. "What do you mean?" The officer hesitated, then explained in a quieter voice, though the guests close enough could still hear. "Your husband is on the record as a decorated veteran. He was awarded for service that most officers in this city still talk about. Many here consider him a hero." A ripple of surprise spread through the crowd. Some guests gasped softly. The bride looked at her groom with fresh eyes, even though she had always known his past. She knew his story, but hearing it spoken out loud in this tense moment gave it a new power. The neighbor, however, went pale. Her smug expression cracked as confusion took over. The officer handed back the cards and cleared his throat. "There's no disturbance here. This wedding is lawful, and you have every right to celebrate." In fact, his voice softened more, almost respectful now. "You deserve this moment." The groom gave a nod, his eyes calm, his voice carrying quiet strength. "Thank you, officer. All we want is peace. Nothing more." The neighbor, furious now, screamed louder. "This isn't right. You can't just let them continue. Look at them. Look at who they are." Her voice shook with frustration, and some guests turned away from her in disgust. One of the children whispered to his mother, "Why is she so mean?" The mother pulled him close, whispering back, "Because she's afraid of love she doesn't understand." The officers ignored the neighbor completely. They stood straighter, almost like guards now, their presence no longer threatening but protective. The guests began to relax, shoulders dropping, whispers fading into soft sighs of relief. The bride's eyes watered, but not with fear anymore, with pride. The groom leaned toward her, speaking only for her to hear. "I told you. No matter what they throw at us, we will stand. She smiled through her tears, whispering back, "And we will stand together." The lead officer turned toward the guests and raised his voice just enough to be heard. "Carry on with your ceremony. There is no issue here." Then he gave the groom one last look, almost like a silent salute. Before stepping back with his team, the music slowly began again, hesitant at first, then stronger as the relief spread. Guests clapped softly, some even wiping tears from their eyes. The neighbor, red-faced and trembling with rage, stormed back toward her porch, slamming her door behind her. But the echo of her hate could no longer reach the garden. The bride and groom stood again in the center, hands clasped tightly, hearts steady. Their love had already faced its first trial that night, and though the wedding was not yet complete, everyone present knew they had just witnessed something far greater than vows. They had seen love refuse to break under pressure, and yet, deep down, the couple knew this was only the beginning. What the officers recognized, and what the neighbor had tried to destroy, was about to lead to something even more powerful, something that would change the lives of everyone who had gathered that night. The music played again, but this time every note carried a deeper meaning. Guests clapped softly as the bride and groom stood together under the golden glow of the lights. It felt like the garden itself was breathing again after holding its breath. The bride's smile returned, though her eyes still glistened with unshed tears. The groom's face was calm, strong, and steady, though inside his heart was pounding. The officers stood at the side, no longer intruders but silent protectors. Their presence kept the crowd settled, but it also sparked whispers. Guests leaned close to one another, quietly repeating the word hero. Some had never known that the groom had such a record, that his name was remembered by those who wore the uniform. The bride looked at him with pride, realizing that his quiet strength tonight was not new. It had always been there. The neighbor's window slammed shut, but her shadow still flickered behind the curtains. Everyone knew she would not forget, nor forgive, that her plan had failed. Yet her silence now only gave the wedding more peace. The couple turned back to the officiant, who cleared his throat, trying to recover from the unexpected interruption. "Where were we?" he said with a small smile. The guests laughed softly, letting go of some of the tension. "Ah, yes, the vows." The bride began, her voice trembling but growing stronger with every word. She spoke of love, of patience, of standing together when the world tried to break them apart. She promised to carry his burdens as her own, and to guard his joy as if it were treasure. Her words drew tears from even the strongest faces in the crowd. When it was the groom's turn, his deep voice carried across the garden like steady thunder. He promised to be her shield, to fight for her peace, to stand beside her no matter the storm. His words felt heavier now, after what had just happened. They were not just promises, they were truths everyone had already seen. The guests erupted in applause, louder this time, unafraid. Rings were exchanged, hands trembling but firm, and the officiant declared them bound together. The bride and groom kissed, and the garden filled with cheers, music, and the soft glow of lights. Children laughed again, relatives hugged one another, and the sound of celebration returned. But the officers did not leave. They remained in the corner, whispering among themselves. One of them, a younger officer with sharp eyes, finally stepped forward and spoke quietly to the groom. "Sir, if you don't mind, may we speak again after the ceremony? There are things you should know." His words were respectful, but they carried a strange urgency. The groom frowned slightly but nodded. "After. Tonight belongs to her." He smiled at his bride, and she smiled back, squeezing his hand. Dinner was served. Laughter rose, and music played into the night. But the officer's presence kept the air heavy. Guests noticed it, though none dared to ask why. The neighbor's house remained dark, her window shut tight, but her earlier rage lingered in everyone's mind. As the night grew deeper, the younger officer approached once more. He leaned close to the groom and spoke so quietly that only the bride could also hear. "Sir, your name. It doesn't just carry honor here. There are people still watching you. People who know what you did overseas. They won't forget, and they may not forgive." The bride's eyes widened. The groom stayed calm, though his chest rose with a heavy breath. He had known this might one day come back. He had hoped it would not happen tonight, but fate had chosen differently. The bride whispered, her voice firm, "Whatever it is, we will face it together." The officer nodded slowly. "Then you should prepare. Because tonight may only be the beginning." The music played on, guests danced, and laughter covered the garden, but behind the joy, the couple now carried a new weight. The neighbor had failed to break them, but her call had awakened something larger. Something waiting just beyond the edge of their happiness. And as the night ended, neither the bride nor the groom could shake the feeling that their wedding was not just the start of their marriage. It was the start of a test far greater than anything they had ever faced before. The night ended with laughter, music, and the scent of food still hanging in the air. Guests left with smiles, congratulating the couple and hugging them tightly. The bride and groom stood hand in hand, waving until the last car disappeared down the quiet street. For a moment, it was only the two of them under the fading lights. She leaned against him, resting her head on his shoulder. "We did it," she whispered. He kissed her forehead gently. "Yes, nothing can stop us now." But in the shadows, the police car still waited. The officers had promised to speak once the guests were gone. The neighbor's house was dark, but the couple felt her watching, even if only through the cracks in her curtains. They knew her anger would not fade easily. The lead officer stepped out of the car and walked toward them. His face was calmer now, almost respectful, but the weight of his steps carried urgency. "I won't take much of your time," he began, his voice low. "But you need to understand why tonight could not be ignored. Your record, sir, is not ordinary. It is marked." The groom stood still, his bride holding his arm, her heart tightening. "I did my duty. Nothing more," the groom answered. His voice was steady, but his eyes revealed the memories he tried to bury. The officer shook his head gently. "That's not how others see it. What you did overseas, there are groups who see you as a symbol. Some admire you, others despise you. When your name was checked tonight, alerts were triggered. It means someone, somewhere was reminded of you. That's dangerous." The bride's lips parted in shock. "Are you saying we're in danger? From who?" The officer hesitated before answering. "There are still people who would rather erase the past than see it honored. And there are those who will use your history to stir trouble." Tonight, the neighbor thought she was making a simple complaint. But her call went further than she intended. The groom's jaw tightened. He understood more than he wanted to. His service had been filled with choices, hard ones, painful ones, and though he carried honor at home, he knew enemies had been made abroad. Enemies with long memories. The officer stepped back, lowering his voice. "I'm not here to frighten you. But you should be careful. Watch the shadows. Protect each other." Then he gave a short nod and returned to the car. The police drove away, leaving the couple alone once more under the quiet night sky. The bride turned to her husband, her hands trembling. "I thought tonight was supposed to be about us. About starting a life together." Her voice broke, and tears slid down her cheeks. He held her face gently, wiping away the tears. "It is, and it still will be. But love is never just about joy. Sometimes it is about standing strong when the world pushes back." She leaned into him, her heart pounding with fear but also with determination. She had seen him calm the officers, face the neighbor's hate, and carry himself with dignity, even under suspicion. Now she realized this strength would be needed, not just for their marriage but for their survival. The house felt quieter than usual when they finally stepped inside. The walls echoed with the silence of their new reality. She looked at the photos already placed on the shelves, the decorations still fresh from the wedding, and she whispered, "This is our home. No matter what comes, no one will take it from us." He smiled faintly, pulling her close. "And no one ever will." But as the couple drifted to sleep, the street outside remained uneasy. The neighbor's light flickered once in the window, then vanished again. Somewhere beyond their small world, whispers of the groom's name spread, carried to ears that had been waiting. The wedding had ended. Their marriage had begun. But the shadow of his past was already moving toward them. Morning sunlight spilled through the windows, warm and golden, but the bride woke with a strange heaviness in her chest. The memory of the police visit, the neighbors screaming, and the officer's warning all came rushing back. She turned and saw her husband still asleep beside her, his face calm but his hand clenched tight as if holding on to invisible battles. She reached out and touched his cheek gently. "We're safe," she whispered, more to herself than to him. The day began like any other. Neighbors passed by, some offering polite waves, others avoiding their eyes. The hateful neighbor across the street did not appear at all, her curtains pulled tight. It should have been peaceful, yet the silence felt heavy, like the pause before a storm. By afternoon, the first sign arrived. A plain white envelope sat on their doorstep. No name, no stamp, just words written in black ink across the front. "We know who you are." The bride froze, her breath catching in her throat. She picked it up with shaking hands and rushed inside. Her husband opened it quickly, his eyes narrowing as he read the single sheet of paper. Inside were only a few lines, but they carried the weight of a threat. "Your past doesn't die. We will remind you." The bride's heart pounded. Is this what the officer meant? Someone is watching us? The groom's jaw tightened, but his voice stayed calm. "It's just words. They want fear. We won't give it to them." But even as he said it, he locked the doors and checked the windows twice. That evening, when they tried to eat dinner, she could hardly swallow a bite. Her eyes kept drifting to the window, expecting shadows to move outside. He sat across from her, steady, trying to bring comfort. "I faced worse before. You're with me now. That makes me stronger." She reached across the table, holding his hand. "I don't care about your past. I care about our future. But if they come..." Her voice broke. "I'm afraid." He pulled her close, his arms wrapping around her. "Fear is normal, but love is stronger. We'll face them together." The days that followed brought more unease. A car they didn't recognize drove by the house slowly, more than once. Strange calls came in the middle of the night silence on the line, then a click. The bride grew restless, jumping at every sound. The groom stayed calm, but he was no fool. He knew this was not the neighbor anymore. This was bigger. One evening, as the sun dipped low, the same police officer from the wedding returned. He knocked gently, his face serious. "I told you this could happen," he said. "There are groups who see you as unfinished business. They will test you, maybe not tonight, maybe not tomorrow, but soon. You should not be alone." The bride felt her knees weaken, but the groom steadied her. "We'll manage," he said. The officer studied him for a moment, then nodded slowly. "I believe you. But be ready." With that, he left, leaving the couple in the quiet house once again. That night, the bride lay awake, listening to every creak of the walls. She turned to her husband and whispered, "Do you regret it? Do you regret what you did in the past that brought us here?" He opened his eyes, staring at the ceiling. His voice was soft, almost tired, but full of resolve. "No, if I had not done what I did, many would not be alive today. And if I must pay a price for that, I will. But I will never regret marrying you. That is the only thing that matters now." She pressed her forehead against his, tears slipping down her cheeks. "Then I will never regret choosing you. Whatever comes, we stand. Outside, the street was quiet. But in the distance, a car engine lingered too long before driving away. The shadow of danger had finally reached their doorstep, and the couple knew the true test of their vows was about to begin. Asterisk. The night air was heavy, carrying a strange stillness. The bride stood by the window, peeking through the curtain. The street looked empty, yet she could not shake the feeling that eyes were on them. Behind her, the groom checked the locks once again, his movements calm but firm. He had lived through nights like this before, waiting, listening, knowing danger lurked close. But this time it was not just his life. It was theirs. A sudden knock on the door shattered the silence. 3 sharp raps. The bride gasped, clutching her chest. The groom moved quickly, holding her back with one hand as he stepped forward. He didn't open the door at once. Instead, he called out, "Who is it?" For a long moment, there was no reply. Then a low voice answered, "You don't belong here." The bride's heart dropped. She grabbed his arm. "Don't open it," she whispered, tears already forming. But the groom straightened, his jaw tight. He opened the door a crack, enough to see the figures outside. 2 men stood on the porch, their faces shadowed under hoods. One held something in his hand, a folded paper, which he shoved forward. "We warned you. Leave before worse comes." The groom did not flinch. He took the paper, closed the door, and locked it again. The bride shook as he unfolded it. Written in bold letters were the words, "The past cannot be erased. You will pay." The bride's legs gave out, and she sank onto the couch. "Why us? Why can't they let us live in peace?" She whispered. He knelt beside her, holding her hands. "Because peace is what they fear. They want hate. They want division. But we chose love." His voice was steady, and though his eyes carried the weight of war, they also carried unshaken resolve. Suddenly, flashing lights cut through the window. The bride gasped again, but this time it wasn't hostile shadows, it was the police. The same officers from their wedding stepped out of the car. They moved fast, surrounding the porch, confronting the men who had delivered the threat. "Hands where we can see them." The lead officer barked. The hooded men froze, then slowly raised their hands. Within moments, they were cuffed and led away, their shouts fading into the night. The officer stepped inside the house, his expression grave but relieved. "We had eyes on your street after the neighbor's call," he admitted. "We suspected this might happen. Tonight you are safe." The bride's tears spilled over as she hugged her husband tightly. Her voice broke as she said, "Safe. For now." The officer nodded. "Maybe, but you must know your story is no longer hidden. People will talk. Some will hate. But many more will see what we saw tonight." He looked between the couple, his tone softening. "They'll see strength. They'll see love that cannot be broken." The groom stood tall, his arm around his wife. "Then let them see. We are not running. We will build our life here, together." The officer gave a faint smile and tipped his head respectfully before leaving. The patrol cars drove off, taking the last of the danger with them. The street fell silent again, but this time the silence felt different, like a deep breath after a storm. The bride leaned into her husband's chest, her voice gentle but sure. "We faced them, and we're still standing." He kissed her hair softly. "And we always will." The neighbor's window cracked open once more. For a moment, her eyes glared across the street. But instead of power, her gaze carried only bitterness, while the couple stood glowing in the light of their love. She shut the window without a word. In that quiet, the bride and groom knew their life would never be simple, never free of shadows. Yet they also knew something greater. Their love had already defeated hate once, and it would do so again. Together, they stepped forward, ready for whatever tomorrow would bring. And so, the wedding that began with fear ended with something far stronger, a promise not only between husband and wife, but a message to anyone watching. Love cannot be broken by anger, hate, or even the weight of the past.